Could One Piece work as a Western? Would anything vital to the story be lost if One Piece swapped genres from a swashbuckling pirate odyssey to a rootin' tootin' cowboy jamboree? There have been a ton of Western references in One Piece, so it's worth thinking about just for a bit of fun. The first thing to consider is the namesake of the story, the One Piece. If that call to adventure doesn't work in a Western, then this thought experiment should be scrapped instantly. Luckily, the start of the Great Pirate Era may as well have been the Gold Rush. It's easy to picture frontiersmen, cowboys, what have you, heading west in search of glorious treasure, because it did happen. Thank God the rest of this video isn't a Rickroll. The next big question is, what would the setting be? One Piece's world is specifically designed to make traveling like a kooky pirate the best way to see the most interesting parts, but I do think that could be reworked with a Western spin. Rather than the adventure starting off in the East Blue, the story starts off in the East, a tamer area of this world, which, let's be clear, is a completely fictional one. I don't think anyone wants to take One Piece and put it in historic 1800s America. There'd certainly be more of an American West vibe in this version, but much like the actual world of One Piece, this will be a cartoony world filled with all kinds of wacky nonsense. The story can still begin in Fuchsia Village, a calm coastal town situated in the northeast. Unfortunately, what happens next makes me have to do something I never wanted to do. Mess with the Grand Line. The Grand Line is one of the greatest settings in fiction, period. I think it's a brilliant narrative device to keep the main characters constantly facing unknown dangers on their way toward a clear goal, while being forced to encounter new civilizations, allies, and enemies along the way. It's the backbone for the entire story, and if it's tweaked in the wrong way, this entire exercise falls apart. So, how the hell can there be a Grand Line equivalent in a Western? The way I see it, there are actually two options to choose from. Option 1. The Grand Branch. The Grand Branch is a massive, sprawling network of rivers that branch off in various directions, leading to countless settlements. Some parts are as wide as 25 miles, while other parts narrow to a few dozen feet. This great river system is said to reach all the way from the East Coast to the West Coast, although no one has ever made it to the West Coast except for one man, Gol D. Roger, the King of the Outlaws. That's where he's said to have left his historic treasure before he was executed. Much like the waters of the Grand Line, the waters of the Grand Branch are not typical. They have horrible episodes of manic behavior, and certain areas are always dangerous. The waters can get so choppy that one cannot control their ship, and, in the worst case scenario, cannot even get to the shore without being caught in the tide and bashed back and forth by the waves. This option has some obvious pros and cons. The biggest pro is that One Piece is so reliant on its nautical setting, especially early in the story, that keeping the water just makes things easier. The crew gets a ship, the devil fruit weakness remains the same. It's a simple enough exercise for any One Piece fan to picture the story playing out similarly if there's water around. However, I think the cons outweigh the pros. The most important of all being the log pose. For the life of me, I cannot figure out how a log pose would work in a network of rivers. That fear of getting lost in vast emptiness just wouldn't be there, and I think that sense of danger is critical to the setting of the Grand Line. Less important, but something that still bothers me, is that it doesn't feel Western enough. Yes, there are plenty of Westerns involving rivers. Plenty of frontier stories that terrify me about traversing violent rapids, but a Western reinterpretation of One Piece that still relies on water for the propulsion of its storytelling kinda feels like a massive cop-out. So, what's the other choice? Option 2, the Grand Desert. A vast desert that stretches from the east to the west. Much like with the Grand Branch, the Grand Desert's endpoint is the mysterious West Coast, where Gol D. Roger left his treasure. The big difference is, there ain't no water, partner. This ancient desert also experiences pockets of extremely abnormal behavior, from intense shifts in temperature to harsh storms and violent winds, with mysterious creatures that live out in the sand, and some who live beneath it. No one knows why this land is so arid, but there are scattered civilizations living off pockets of water. The pros of this setting are the obvious Western imagery. Cowboys in the desert, Big duh. But also, this setting creates that fear of getting lost since it's so vast and open, which means a log post type device is vital. In this case, the log post is able to point you in the direction of water, enabling the characters to bounce from civilization to civilization while still maintaining a sense of mystery and danger. I honestly cannot think of any major cons other than losing that immediate One Piece vibe with the crew on their ship. But what if I were to tell you we could fix that? Loners like Mihawk could simply travel the desert alone by horse. But big outlaw posses or army rangers? Well, they're traveling across the sands on massive sand ships that are propelled along by strong winds and a bit of industrial steam-powered tech. Yeah, a little out there for any Western, but remember, this is still One Piece, and I think this level of over-the-top ridiculousness would fit into this world. Plus, you just gotta have a place for the crew to hang. They all can't be riding separate horses or spread across 3 individual carriages or whatever. This makes it fun, at least I think so. Also, since this is a world without vast amounts of water, it doesn't make sense for Devil Fruit users to have water as a weakness. Instead, it's the Grand Desert itself. More specifically, straight up desert sand without a hint of water in it. Luffy won't be able to just walk straight across the desert, but he'd be able to walk around settlements they encounter since they'll have fertile land. Hence why some form of transportation across the desert is critical for even the most powerful ranger or outlaw. If you couldn't tell by now, I prefer the Grand Desert option. There's something fun about the Grand Branch, but I just don't think it works as well. Let me know what you prefer, or if there's a better option I haven't even thought of. Now, with way too much time spent on the age-old water versus sand debate, let's get into some actual story by talking about the main characters. As a wee lad, Monkey D. Luffy got to know the notorious cowboy outlaw, red-haired Shanks. One day, he ate a devil fruit, which meant he could no longer walk upon desert sand. Big deal. He lives a secure life in the East. But oh no. He has dreams of forming his own outlaw posse and becoming king of the outlaws. Gold Roger was still executed by the world government 20 years ago. I really don't think much of the pirate government dynamic gets lost with an outlaw government dynamic. An all-powerful government which rules above local governments is a classic Western motif anyway. The first person Luffy recruits to his posse is the notorious bounty hunter, Zoro. Now, it's incredibly tempting to make Zoro a gunslinger rather than a swordsman. It's eating away at me, my longing to describe to you his triple-wielding technique, where he uses his tongue to pull the trigger of a pistol in his mouth. Oh, how I wish I could say that to you. But no. Zoro is a swordsman. He is a swordsman. I can't change that. Plus, it's just a Western. Swords are still very much in play, and if anything, they'd be a rarer form of combat, which adds to this Western Zoro's Ronin vibes, connecting him with a more ancient fighting style. He dreams of becoming the world's greatest swordsman, which Cowpoke Luffy still thinks is rad, so the two team up. I don't think Usopp's deal changes much either. The big change would actually be the Mary being a sand ship rather than a water one, which would alter the design somewhat, but she'd still have that gloriously innocent look. Sanji is where things get somewhat tricky, but only because his introductory setting, backstory, and dream are so connected with the sea. First up, Baratier needs to become a saloon in the desert. Still serving fine dining and booze, of course, but with a bit of frontier grime to it. At first, I thought that Sanji and Zeph's shared backstory could be that they were both stranded in the desert for days and days without physically being stuck anywhere. But that actually wouldn't work. The two wouldn't stay together, and there wouldn't be that great reveal. No, these two need to be stuck somehow. So, instead of being stuck up high, they're stuck down low. The two are trapped in some random cavern hole in the middle of the desert, unable to crawl out of it or even see anything but the sky above them. The desert winds constantly throw sand down at them, making it even more difficult to call up for help. With that established, the same thing can happen. Different sides of the hole, big reveal about the food in Zeph's foot, they're saved at the last minute. The Baratier was established on the edge of society, at the beginnings of the Grand Desert, as a checkpoint for those lost in it. Sanji highly valuing food would remain the same, but I think he should have that same feeling about water, which is extremely relevant in a world with a severe lack of it. Speaking of which, Sanji and Zeph have a shared dream of the All Basin, a mythical place somewhere in the Grand Desert where all the great bodies of water are said to connect in this beautiful oasis filled with all the fish of the world. So yeah, I think this all still works, and nothing much needs to be changed about Sanji's introduction. However, while I'm still here, I should address more about the desert, specifically combat, since in the original arc, everyone is stuck on their ships because they're surrounded by water. There are two reasons why everyone isn't just charging at each other over the sand. In regard to Devil Fruit power holders, which Luffy would be the only one here, I think? I have no clue what Pearl's deal is. Anyway, it's as I said before, their weakness is the desert sand instead of the sea. How that works is nearly the same, with the sand pretty much turning to quicksand beneath them, trying to suck them in where they'll suffocate if they aren't rescued in time. But why don't regular people, who can walk on the desert, also not fight on it? Well, it makes for horrendous footing, really putting one at a near fatal disadvantage in a fight, so if there's something solid to stand on instead, you'll always opt for that. Thus, why battles will still be limited to sand ships or other structures out in the desert, rather than everyone just hauling ass after each other on foot. A bit of a stretch, I guess, but what's One Piece without some stretching? I think it works well enough. Aw shucks, partner. Now Nami is a tricky one, ain't she? Not so much her. I mean, her entire personality, backstory, and dream can remain the same. Instead of being an expert nautical navigator, ooh boy howdy does she know how to navigate them desert dunes. No, the big question mark here is Arlong and the Fishmen. What the hell are we gonna do here? Glad you asked. Cavemen. Freaky little underground critter people. Oh yeah, they live in mysterious caverns beneath the Grand Desert. What's that about? Well, One Piece loves a good mystery, so why not West Piece? We don't know jack about cavemen other than rumors and hearsay by the time Nami comes around. If you want to know more, you have to wait another 500 episodes. But for the purpose of this exercise, we do know Nami's joining the crew all the same. Finally, it's time to enter the Grand Desert proper. Yep, so far we've just been on the cusp. The real way into the Grand Desert is through a massive gap between two continent-spanning mega walls. These walls are said to be built long before anyone can remember in order to keep back the elements of the desert. Yet, the amount of desert that is still managed to push beyond the walls is a monument to the Grand Desert's power. If one wants to stock up on supplies before traveling through the wall, you'll need to pass through the last outpost in the frontier, where the King of the Outlaws was born and executed, Log Town. Nothing changes at that location. When the posse sails the Going Merry toward the opening, they are suddenly swept up by the powerful current that flows between the walls. A current so strong that ships and people can only travel one way. The wind will speed you along your way out, but prevent you from ever returning. It's a one-way ticket, and the Straw Hat Posse goes in head first. With all that said, what do you think? Could One Piece have worked as a Western? I honestly feel like it could have been badass, which is just a testament to the strength of One Piece's writing. The characters, the structure of the adventure, the overarching conflict and sense of scale are what make it impressive. The pirate filter is just a fun treat for us to enjoy along the way. For the most part. I mean, One Piece couldn't be any genre, like a romantic comedy, as much as I'd love that, but I could easily imagine it as a sci-fi story too. Hell, it's sci-fi right now. I could keep going on about the nitty-gritty details, but instead I'll speed run through a few final thoughts on the rest of the Straw Hats and the first major locations, then I'm curious to get your thoughts in the comments. Chopper is a horse. Robin dresses with a pirate flair at first, and after the time skip, she still loses her sense of style completely. Alabasta is in a desert kingdom. It's a famous lush oasis that has been completely dried out over the last few years. Pretty much the same story, but an aesthetic inversion to make it pop as a location distinct from the overarching setting. Sky Island. Why couldn't some crazy desert sand phenomenon be able to blast the Mary into the sky? Cowboys believe in dreams too. Frankie is more steampunk in his design, particularly post-timeskip. The Sea Train is the desert train. Aqua Laguna is a massive sandstorm that slowly has been burying Sand 7. Enies Lobby resides over a massive pit in the desert. Kokoro is a cave maid, which are mythical creatures said to be beautiful, and turns out they are. Brook is Bones. Cowboys love bones. Laboon is a giant sandworm. Yes, of course there are desert beasts. What do you think got Shanks' arm? Ors is known as the Earth Puller, said to have pushed the plates of the continent. And Rangerford? Actually, no more spoilers. Please let me know any of your thoughts on this topic, and until the next time, I'll shut up.